Good morning, folks. Thanks for joining us today. This is another installment of what we call our New Vermonters in the Workplace webinar. And it is specifically for employers really anywhere in Vermont or anyone who's interested in learning on how to become an employer of choice for our new Vermonters who are coming to our region. We have the BDCC. I will start by saying that we've been focusing on this for quite a few years now, and are really excited to now have just over a year of practical experience in employment services under our belt in doing this work. And so I think in some ways now is a perfect time to really expand what we've learned to places outside of the Brattleboro region. What I will do is do a quick history background. Can folks see my presentation? So all of the work around New Vermonters that the BDCC is doing, we really categorize under our Welcoming Communities project. And it's really focused on recruiting, retaining, and supporting a 21st century workforce. That includes New Vermonters and other diverse and or underserved populations. But what we really do believe that for our communities and economies to remain vibrant, this is the path that all communities really need to go in to ensure they have the workforce they need to continue to operate. And this is really just a very basic vision of what we have around how to foster workforce and economic development through supporting New Vermonters. A lot of this work is supported and funded by the Working Communities Challenge, which is an initiative that we also lead from a team of Southern folks in Southern Vermont, Windham and Bennington counties. And so you'll hear us use that interchangeably depending on what exactly that work is. Not something you need to worry about, but if you hear about it, it's all one and the same from our perspective. And a few really big tranches of the work we're doing, it's again supporting folks who are already here, making sure our workplaces and our communities are as welcoming and supportive of folks as possible now, and then really bolstering existing systems and new systems, resources, processes, practices that support New Vermonters at a scale that really begins to change and improve our workforce outlook. And an incredible sign of progress and an accomplishment that we were able to help support was the opening of a refugee resettlement office here in Southern Vermont. And that's the Ethiopian Community Development Council. We'll talk more about our partners there in a sec. Big picture, how refugee resettlement works. There are these organizations nationally called VOLAGs, voluntary agencies, and they work directly with the Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, Office of International Migration, International Office of Migration, to identify and receive refugees and other similar populations into the United States. And so for anyone to arrive at one of these VOLAGs, that's when that they have been reviewed by Department of State. I hate the term vetted, but that is what is more often used, that they are folks who have been through the immigration process and are now coming to the United States. How that is done is these voluntary agencies have offices or affiliates within communities. And so ECDC, the Ethiopian Community Development Council, is a national organization that operates a field office here in Brattleboro and soon this coming year in Bennington County. What's unique is that for a very long time, there was only one VOLAG operating in Vermont. That was in Chittenden County. That was USCRI. Now ECDC is a second entirely different institution that is operating in the state of Vermont. And so that's exciting. Each New Vermonter who arrives through a VOLAG has a case manager and or support staff that can be a resource and help them navigate being a New Vermonter. It's also possible that there may be a refugee who arrives in our communities who hasn't yet been through one of these organizations, it's always great to make sure that they've connected with these point folks. So if you as an employer meet a new Vermonter, if you haven't yet met their case manager or their employment services provider or engaged with that, you can also direct them to that resource as needed. If you believe that they're, they just found their way here through word of mouth, which we know is happening also. Very quickly, we use the phrase new Vermonter because we are seeing folks with a diversity of backgrounds and immigration statuses. Refugees, when they arrive, have full work, work permitted. They're eligible for permanent residency, driver's licenses, access to other federal benefits. Humanitarian parolees, and that is a term of immigrant that the majority of our Afghan community members arrived as parolees. Not a great word within the American criminal justice context, but they are paroled into the United States for humanitarian reasons. They are also entitled to work permits, driver's license, access to federal benefits. Asylum seekers is the last group of folks that we're seeing more of, and they may not necessarily have access to work when they arrive here in Vermont, depending on how long they've been in the United States total. But they do have access to certain benefits, and we do have a really great community of asylum seekers who are work authorized and are looking for work. Quickly, I'll touch on, and we can do a quick introductions for the various partners and roles. As I mentioned, the Ethiopian Community Development Council is our VOLAG here in Southern Vermont, and they have a great group of staff. And I would love to introduce Abdul. If you just want to give a quick introduction. It looks like your camera isn't working, but they can hear your voice at least if you want to say a quick few words.
Exactly. I have a problem with the camera. I'm sorry for that. Good morning to all. So Abdul Wahid Rizwanzaz, I work as employment navigator for ECDC.
Thank you so much. And I haven't yet updated my presentation, but we also have Ursula, who works at their community center, the Multicultural Community Center here in Brattleboro. Ursula, if you just want to say a quick hello.
Hi, I work mainly with co-sponsors and with all the other case managers and navigators. It's sort of a communications network that I'm trying.
You folks are doing a great job at the community center. It's truly, bustling with activity at all times, regardless of when you show up. So thank you for being here. Asylum seekers, that is a different organization that supports those individuals. That's the Community Asylum Seekers Project. And their case manager is Dora Urheni, who we've worked with for many years now. And, so if you're working with an asylum seeker, that's someone who you can also work with for support. And then there's, of course, us, the BDCC, and I would just love to introduce briefly Amir Samar, who's our workforce project manager.
Good morning, everybody. I work here with BDCC, and I'm helping new Vermonters with their job navigation.
Great, thanks. Among many, many other things. Thank you, Amir. So one thing that we really want to start and be clear about is that we at the ECDC and BDCC have done a lot of learning and have really spent a year plus on developing a process and a system in order to do this work in a collaborative, efficient, and effective way. And it's also confusing and new for many of us. And so to the extent that we can cut back on confusion, a duplication of efforts, and really share what we've learned, That's really important. The other thing that I'll say is that if you are working with Abdul, Amir, or Dora, or any of these partners in this system we've created, you won't be referred a potential employee who is not work eligible. So that's something that as an employer, if you are working as partners with us, that's one thing that you really don't need to worry about. Is this person legally eligible to work? That being said, just because they are legally eligible to work does not necessarily mean it's a straightforward or easily understood process if it's your first time doing it. And so I have some written information here, but we've also, and I'll share in the past, had immigration lawyers come and present to us. And so one thing that is always available is to rewatch old webinars. This one will be posted also. You can do that at welcomingcommunitiesvt.com. You'll see a section for past meetings. But I'll also just play a few short clips from this video. It's time-stamped as well. But these are like the greatest hits when you're onboarding a new Vermonter as an employee that are really important to know. And of course, these are things that Amir and Abdul are trained in and will be able to help you navigate. And so, where are we? Great. So first and foremost, everyone needs an I-9. That is something that regardless of someone's background, their employment, that's something that you always capture. What is unique about that is, sorry. And so one thing that is important to understand is the documents that someone needs to provide will look very different. And so I'm just going to play a short clip of some of the frequently asked questions, and then I'm going to do a very quick overview on what those documents.
Alex,
Yep.
we can't hear,
Oh no.
or at least I
Okay.
can't.
Can no one else hear? Okay, so I will actually talk through this then. Sorry, I can hear it on my headphones, but no problem. So the one thing that is not required that many folks assume is required would be a social security number. And so a social security number makes it easier for your payroll systems to track their tax deductions when they're working. However, it's not required, and it is not, you may not require it as an employer. And so that's one thing that we'll touch on is what are the real do's and don'ts as an employer. Again, these are things, our support folks will walk you through. But this last thing is what's kind of important is what the documents look like for an I-9. Normally, it's just, if you are a US citizen, it's like a photo ID and the usual. But so the next is you'll see again on your I-9, there's a list of A documents, which you only need one of. And then there's a list of B documents, which you can do any assortment of. So many of the B documents are a photo of the person with their name on it. And one of these documents is often also required. And so some of these are really straightforward, like the work authorization card is able to be used as a standalone. That's an A-list document because it has a photo and it has your USCIS number. And so all of your B documents will look something often like these other ones that don't have a picture. And it could be a student ID with someone's name on it and one of these other formal documents that doesn't have a picture on it. Again, when you look at your I-9s, which you've done all the time, you're often almost focused on column A. Column B will have that full list of what's needed. But again, the looking at the name of the required document on the B or C list, and then making sure there's a photo ID. This generally isn't an issue because, again, most folks, especially refugees, arrive eligible to work, and they'll have this EAD, Employment Authorization Document, or EAC card. And if it has a photo of them on it, you're all set. And so that is what, you know, again, they're not US IDs, they're not US passports, so it may look a little different, but our folks, Abdul and Amir, are really the ones responsible for onboarding and hiring, making sure those documents that folks are bringing them. And then the last is the prohibited actions. So there is, you know, the two big things around undocumented non-citizens are really straightforward, is that if you know someone isn't eligible to work, either now or in the future, you know, if in theory asylum seekers' work authorization expires, and so that is something that you may need to follow up with them on, you know, note that date. But really, if you know someone isn't documented to work and you hire them anyways, that is against the law. The last is hiring any person without complying with the record keeping requirements. This is really, even though it's technically illegal, it is really just good best practice to protect yourself as the employer, ensure all of your, you know, I's are dotted and T's are crossed, to just keep a hold of all of these records, you know, as needed. And then the last is really what I've mentioned already, is discriminatory I-9 practices. You cannot prefer one of those documents over another. If they provide any acceptable combination of what's listed at the I-9, then they are eligible to work. And so even if it's difficult to understand, hard to read, something you're not used to seeing, that is where we often see the most amount of discrimination, and from the Social Security number standpoint. It may be more cumbersome for your payroll system to withhold those taxes and then pay them once that individual has their Social Security number, but that is not an eligible reason or a legal reason to bar that person from employment. And then last, of course, and this is the most straightforward that we should all be familiar with, is you can't say, I don't want to hire someone from this country or from this national origin or because of this specific background. I think those are the most familiar discriminatory practices that we all know unfortunately happen but aren't legal. But these other around the paperwork, these are ones that we are here as partners to help prevent from happening. And we also offer diversity, equity, and inclusion training for workplaces regularly as well. So even if you do think there may be concern about inclusiveness or national origin discrimination or people not understanding folks of different backgrounds and cultures, we are also here to help employers work through those challenges also. So that is a very short overview. Again, you can watch this entire video. It has a bit more anecdotes, a bit more specific information around that around the paperwork and the legal process. But to date, I haven't heard of any issues around that. And we've had quite a few folks working already. So that is there. And now we can talk about what I think is the more exciting, and the reason why folks are interested in this is the hiring, intake, and recruitment process. And so what we'll talk about here is the employer and the employee intake process. You're, of course, only responsible for one of these, but understanding what has happened prior to someone being introduced to you as a potential employee, assuming they're going through this process. Again, this is why we really emphasize the process and system, is so that we can set expectations and understanding, across communities, across regions, and through diverse populations. So I'm going to start with the intake process. And again, this is something that is more on Abdul's side and the ECDC side of things. We all meet weekly, and so it's rare that there will be something that's really only one person's responsibility for knowing or understanding. But you'll see that when we refer to the ECDC employment case manager, this here we're talking about Abdul. And so when folks first arrive, they go through an intake interview process with ECDC, ranges from everything health background, career background, employment experience, career aspiration. Do they have credentials or certifications they want recertified? All of these different kinds of questions are asked ideally within the first 30 days. It's a busy time, but this will certainly happen before an employee should be reaching out for employment. Because part of all of these questions help us know what's a good fit, what's a place that they're likely to succeed and really work out. We also provide, we being Amir primarily, and we also have video content that we've been generating at the BDCC around pre-employment readiness trainings. This is an overview of the different kinds of careers in Windham County, as well as some workplace cultural norms, how things are done in the United States around hiring and recruitment, a variety of different trainings and workshops and resources that we have. Lastly, in terms of things that you really don't need to be too concerned or involved in as employers, is the WIOA enrollment. And so folks are eligible for WIOA, which is a Department of Labor program, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And what this means is that when someone is enrolled in WIOA, is that there's additional support and resources available to them for work-related barriers and opportunities. So whether that's gear, help with transportation for the hiring and onboarding process, translation support, there's a wide variety of eligible expenses. And so that is something that you can work with our team on and understanding. It's like, hey, so-and-so's having trouble getting to work. We have someone who's willing to drive them, but they need a gas card, or they may need help subsidizing transportation, or this person should really have steel-toed boots before they show up on the job site. Certain things like that, we can double check, and we'll make sure that those expenses are reimbursable, and that that Department of Labor can help support that individual. Again, the Multicultural Community Center is an incredible resource, both from a volunteer perspective, and that's often where English classes, our Department of Labor case managers are, and other folks who are providing these kinds of supports. So as people are settling in and have really identified an area of work or opportunities they may be interested in, this is where you may start working with Amir, and we'll talk about the employer end of things also, to set up a job site, a site visit or a job tour, so that folks who may not have ever seen a ski slope or worked in a bakery or done traditional American retail, this is an opportunity for folks, job seekers, to see what it's like to get an understanding of what the environment is, both from a geographic standpoint and from a cultural standpoint. Is it outside? Is it too cold? Is it in a place that's accessible to them through transportation that's available? Those kinds of things. And then we can start, the job application, onboarding, and the continued support that we can provide. So that's what it means to just become an employer. And I will show, okay. And that is from the employee side of things. And so in order to set up a job tour, a site visit, or to really get your business, in front of Amir and Abdul as a place looking to hire new Vermonters, we have an intake form that we require all employers to fill out. Again, so that we can best understand who may be a good fit at your place of employment. You know, this is very much a matchmaking effort, and so that's why we require this. However simple or complex you believe your job to be, we need all of this information, you know, before we can consider placing an employee at your place of employment. Again, this is once we have this information, you're uploaded into our shared project management, you know, system, and so that we can all look and keep track of what opportunities are available and what skills folks have. So that's, again, we have our own system where we have the lists of all our new arrivals who have completed this intake process from the employee, and then we have your employer intake. And so from there, we can look at, oh, there's a group of folks who are looking to start work, who are comfortable working in the outdoors with their hands and have this kind of experience. And we notice that your company is looking to hire 3 to 4 people, you know, who have, and at least one of whom needs a decent command of the English language. When we have all this information, then we work as a team to put together a cohort, group of individuals, or, you know, to get started on that placement process. And of course, if you have questions about what does any of this mean, or I have an idea about transportation options, but they're not just for me, can you, that's all stuff we can work on as well. So again, that is how you as an employer get into our system. We know that you're here looking to support new Vermonters with employment, and that you're ready for an employee in theory. The thing that we, you know, are both, you know, honest about and proud of is that it can be difficult to support and retain new Vermonters without the right systems in place and without the right resources available both to you as an employer and to the individual as an employee. And so, you know, to become an employer of choice for new Vermonters is our goal, is that folks are speaking about your place of employment to say, I felt really welcomed and supported here in my work environment. You should come work with me. And one thing I'll mention about this is that in our, you know, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, all of these folks do have freedom of movement in our country, which means if they hear of an economic opportunity that they are more interested in than the one they currently have, they are certainly entitled and empowered to seek that opportunity. And so we see that is one driving force that we see in the growth of immigrant populations and communities, is either folks are moving into your community or they're moving out of your community based on the opportunities there. And so our goal, of course, in Southern Vermont is to be known as a place that is actively welcoming and supporting new Vermonters so that more folks will come. And so this is our goal. Just some of the things to think about. I'm going to go through a few of our top best practices and things that we know are of most concern. And just kind of give some ideas. And first and foremost, of course, is around communication challenges. And first and foremost, you know, all new Vermonters have access to English language learning classes and resources at the Multicultural Community Center, if you're in Windham County, and at the Tutorial Center, and for folks in Bennington County. And Vermont Adult Learning runs online classes and classes on their site as well. And so that is one thing that we really support all folks in engaging with, and in some ways they are required to attend a certain number of hours within their first initial arrival time. Other resources is that if you are an employer who has or was looking to apply for Vermont Training Program funds, you can include ELL, the additional cost of communicating in a different language or teaching someone your work practices in English in that grant. And we've seen some really great successes through that, where folks are being trained on the job and take an hour out of their day to work with an ELL teacher on the standing operating procedures that they're working with every day and that. Google Translate is your friend. You know, most of us have smartphones on us at all times. And it may not be perfect, but more often than not, it does just fine. But the last, you know, second to last thing, but perhaps more important is that if there is something particular on onboarding, safety training, any HR specific stuff, if there's something that you really need to know, there's explicit and clear communication on, there are interpreters available through both ECDC and BDCC. We can help identify an interpreter, and it may, you know, there are fee-for-service opportunities, and there may be resources eligible to help offset that cost through Department of Labor. And so that is something that, depending on how much time you may need, that is something that you really should share with Amir and Abdullah as soon as possible, to say, we really need 8 hours a day of interpretation the first 2 weeks of work to make sure they understand everything, and then that everyone's safe on the job. And then we'll work together to devise a plan to make that happen. And you know, and go from there. Another thing is, you know, balancing flexibility as an employer with equity. And this is something that we learned, I wouldn't say the hard way, but we've learned as a team with our employers about how to do things perhaps differently or better. So first and foremost is look at your holiday policy and your time off policy, and make sure that it is agnostic to the cultural, religion, or background that someone may have. And that, you know, and examples that we've had is that in up north, you know, there are employers that we've heard of that, you know, they give time off to folks who celebrate different holidays, and that, you know, may impact folks differently. And so they realize that instead of treating folks who have different religious backgrounds or needs differently, they did two things. One is floating holidays, which allows individuals to spend their time off however they find most appropriate and most necessary. And also finding opportunities to celebrate and recognize the cultural touchstones of Vermonters, regardless of their background. And so my favorite example is the office had both an Eid celebration in which you know, their company spent, you know, company HR, you know, wellness, community resources on that celebration, but they also subsidized hunting licenses for folks who were interested in that. And so one of those is recognizing a Vermont cultural tradition of hunting, which again, I'll say isn't exclusive to anyone's background. It's a thing all Vermont, you know, many Vermonters of variety of religious, ethnic, cultural, you know, country of origin backgrounds can appreciate. And then something specific to a growing new population. The other is a flexibility that we see is how you think about onboarding and hiring and training. And so this is where deviating from standing operating procedure may benefit both you as an employer and your employees. And one thing that we really encourage is a cohort model and either shadowing or mentoring. And those can often be done together. And so the cohort model is really beneficial because more often than not, there is a wide diversity of language proficiency from new Vermonters. Some folks may have perfect English and some folks may never have spoken any English at all. When you train as a group, it's more likely that you will have that spread represented in your cohort. And so in that regard, the person who speaks the best English often is able to serve as a translator and interpreter for the rest of the team. And it also allows that team of folks to learn together, to feel like they are part of both the new team at your place of employment, but also feel comfortable that they are a part of a team of folks more similar to themselves. And so again, it's learning can happen together. If one person who has more limited English doesn't quite understand an instruction, they can turn to a teammate who speaks their native language and say, did you understand that? And if the person did understand that, they said, yes, here's what they meant. And so that is where folks can learn together. And we've seen those folks really turn into leaders of their shift or of these teams, and they are often great folks to promote into oversight, managerial, training opportunities, because they're both interpreters, translators, trainers, and employees. And so this is one way to really support folks. And then the other thing is shadowing existing employees is also really important, so that not only do they know that they're doing the job correctly, but again, that long-term connection with feeling a part of the team, that there's someone who has been here for 10 years maybe, has my back, who's the part of their role is to make sure that I succeed. And I think that is really helpful and important when there are folks both new to the country, but maybe new to the industry. Hard workers that have never made yogurt or gluten-free bread or have never operated a ski lift before. They're perfectly capable of doing these jobs, but often it says, yeah, no, this is right. This is what it looks like. You're doing a good job. Or here's what we've learned from doing it for 10 years is, hold the knife this way instead of that way, and you can move faster. The tips and tricks that really your best employees know, their ability to share that with new workers is really important also. And again, signage is cheap. If there's something you're concerned about, safety wise or communicating your culture, you can hire folks. It's often not very expensive to translate your signage for you. If it's legally mandated signage that you must have up in your workplace, then it must be translated, made available to folks in their language. So that's something you can ask your Department of Labor for, the people who make you post all those signs, and if they're not up, you get in trouble. They can help provide all of those translated materials for you. If you really need a document interpreted or translated and it's your standing operating procedure for a new machine, a special thing that the employee needs to do, reach out to your employer support partners. Reach out to Amir Abdul and say, do you know someone who might be able to help translate this document? Do communicate your values, because to be frank, learning about the American workplace and American workplace culture isn't always great for new arrivals, because things are tough for Vermonters, new and old. And so, a great example is when folks receive their first paycheck, and this isn't necessarily a bad example, but when folks receive their first paycheck and they see all the withholdings, and they say, well, I thought you told me I was making this amount of money, and now it doesn't look like that. This is where you can say, we've really invested in our company to provide good health insurance for our employees. And so as an employee, you receive this much less, but it's because you're receiving this benefit. And this is a choice we made as a company. That's one example. Or, if you do participate in diversity, equity, inclusion trainings, workshops, celebrations, you name it, make sure that that's shared with folks, and that they understand that, the intention of all of this is to make sure that we are being welcoming and inclusive. And again, we have trainings and workshops, our Welcoming Workplaces training happening regularly. And for folks interested, you can reach out to us, information on welcomingcommunitiesvt.com on that as well. And then leadership. When you're creating an inclusive workplace culture, this is something that one of the leading employers of New Vermonters up in Chittenden County, again, decades of experience up there doing this work, has said that your culture is defined by the worst behavior tolerated by the most senior person. And it sounds, very fluffy, but, especially if you are hiring a cohort, of folks. There can be clashes of culture, and things that happen in the workplace, and how your leadership responds to that is both of legal importance to ensure that you operate a non-discriminatory workplace environment, right? But it's also about that being that employer of choice. And knowing how the labor market is, there are many job opportunities and many employers who are really stepping up to help support new Vermonters. And so as good opportunities are certainly shared, but remember that for folks who have a really difficult or needlessly upsetting time in a workplace, they share that with their community also. And so this is really where even as just making sure that your intention and attention is more important than how fast your outcomes are. So getting that stuff translated in a timely way, it might take time to get everything translated. But again, it doesn't take a lot to take out your phone and to use Google Translate and say, we are trying, we want you here. How else can we help while we wait? And again, it's that intent and showing that you're here to really support all of your employees, but these folks in particular. Be iterative. We learned about the floating holiday recommendation because the first day of Eid, no one showed up to work. And, we had employers calling Amir saying, where are our employees? And he said, oh, well, it's Eid. And it would be like showing up on Christmas Day for us. And the assumption is there is no work on that day. And so that gave us two learnings. One was that, the floating holiday is that, folks will need to take different holidays than what we're used to, and that it's up to an employer to really make sure that that's possible and accepted. And then on the employee side, the cultural understanding of in the United States, in most workplaces, you need to give notice ahead of time when you won't be at work. And so what could have been a really terrible experience wasn't. It was, an opportunity to communicate across partners for us all to learn. And then we have recommendations for both employer and employee on how to do things better and how to avoid this moving forward. And again, case managers and support organizations is as important with communicating it with employees, because there may be a cultural or language barrier that we all need help overcoming before you have that really meaningful employee-employer connection and opportunity to support one another. And then, lastly, perfect is the enemy of good. No place of employment is perfect for any of their employees or as an employer, as a business owner. We all know that, we're always working through this work. There are cultural miscommunications between folks who have lived in the same town their entire lives. And so again, this isn't, do or die, make or break. This is an iterative process that we're all learning about and committed to. And that's what's most important. And I think we're doing a darn good job here in Southern Vermont. I pulled some numbers from our October report, which is it's still getting better from there. But of the 120 total people, many of which were children, 71 individuals have gone through our intake process. And as of October, 56 had full-time employment. And so we estimate that's around 80% of the folks who were looking for work at the time and were able to work found employment. What we're seeing now, two things that I think are our greatest sign of success is, one is that people who have been working comfortable jobs that they've mastered are starting to look for their next opportunities, whether that's in that place of work or other places of work. And that is, I see, one of our greatest signs of success, because when folks first arrive, their focus is very much on the first job. They need something that pays a wage as soon as possible so that they can both support themselves and support their families back home. And then as they become more comfortable and secure and stable, they start saying, okay, I can do this job with my eyes closed. What's next for me here? Here, not just being your place of employment again, but here in Southern Vermont. And so this is where providing them additional opportunity within your place of employment whether it's sending them to trainings, providing more cross-training opportunities, to promote, to be able to be promoted. That's really what we're focusing on now. And we have folks who are change jobs because they realize that the more I work, the harder I work at this place of employment, the more money I'll make, and that's where I want to spend my time. And so thinking about that career progression is not something that folks arrive with, but is certainly a sign of success. And it's something you should start planning for when you first arrive, when you have your first, hires, because while their initial focus may not be on what's next, being able to, during that job site, at that tour, to say, here's where you start, but after a year, here's what job you could upgrade to. And if you get a little bit more education, or if your English gets a lot better, then you can move here and make more money. That's how you get a lifelong employee. And that is where you can really, start filling those jobs and really, finding what works. And then the other thing I'll say is that we've had folks who have left the region because they've heard that there are jobs or opportunities, communities that are different, better than ours. And some of those folks have come back. And I don't know if it speaks to how poorly things may be going in other communities or how well things are going here, but we are special, we are unique. I think as a business owner, you must think that even you feel crazy to be doing what you do here in Southern Vermont, but you're here for a reason and you love it here. And this is where you want to make your life, your job, your wage, you name it. The same sentiments are felt by New Vermonters. And so that is something we can't discount, in the same way that you can't assume all New Vermonters don't like the cold, because not all lifelong Vermonters like the cold, and not all New Englanders like the cold, and not all Americans like the cold. But in the same way is to say that, these folks are looking for their forever home if they can find one. And they may be as interested in your community and your place of employment as anyone is to make that. And so really trying to do that is important. And again, the first job isn't necessarily the career. And so as their first employer, you're also not responsible for providing this person with a life of full-time employment with, whatever wage they're looking for, or that career progression. It's really, we're here to support you as an employer, doing the most you can to support folks in succeeding at the jobs you have. And again, that's why it's really important for us to understand what those jobs are. That is the long and the short of it. This meeting is recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again. You'll be able to, if you're interested, you can reach out to us. There's a little button on the website that says looking to hire, and it will help send an email, and we can send you the intake form from there. And then it may take time. And I think that's something that what we've learned is that the employers who have had the most success started working on these internal questions, these processes, thinking about, look, how long would I need an interpreter? What do I need translated for the training? There were folks doing this in November and December of 2021, despite our first arrivals of New Vermonters being in January and February, and the first folks didn't get to work until March. And so this does take time. And you may have a job posted for a long time. You have that one position in your bakery that you really want filled. It may take time to find the baker who comes to our community. But when that fit is ready to be made, we'll know because you're in our system. And we're asking those questions, and we'll find that person who ran a patisserie back in their home country. And all of a sudden, you have someone who likes waking up at 3:30 in the morning to bake bread. And then you found that employee. And so I think that, again, it takes time for us all to get to know each other and the jobs and the backgrounds of the folks who are looking for them. But it's through this team that we really take this approach. And it's through this system and the processes that help us know that folks are likely to succeed. So that is my spiel. Happy to answer any questions. for folks on the line. Amir, Abdul, if I missed anything or forgot it, please add it and correct me. Yeah.
So Alex, I have a question actually. And it might be in the weeds a little bit, but I think that it might be good for the listeners. So back to the Social Security piece. So if they do not need a card for them to work, so are you collecting, you know, depending on how they fill this out, obviously there's no number that goes with it, but are you taking those deductions out when they're working?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to do it. And this is where it's, ironically, the more professionalized or automated a payroll system you have, the more difficult it becomes. But folks are still required to fill out a W-2 or the tax withholding for employees, that form, which they may not be able to complete with a Social Security number either. But what I would recommend is that as an employer, you withhold those taxes and you put them in escrow or something similar. You track those funds. The alternative is that the employee can also pay those back taxes essentially until they get their Social Security number. We're talking 30 to 90 days. Right, Amir or Abdul, you can let me know how long it takes after you arrive to get your Social Security number.
It's mostly when folks are arriving at the campuses. They're not coming directly to for example, Vermont. They're it depends to the cases, 3 to 6 months into the campuses, military campuses or wherever else. So they're mostly receiving their Social Security there, or some of them are when they're arriving here. I can say within 3 months, they are getting their SSN.
Yep. And so this 90 days is actually kind of an important random number. And then that is when the most intensive resources and support are made available to new Vermonters. And it is by that 90-day mark that folks are expected to have their first employment. So in these first 90 days, and really within those first 2 weeks, folks are applying for their Social Security card. They're enrolling in all of their state benefits and going through these processes. And then in theory, by the time they show up to work, all of these things will be in place. If they aren't yet, we're talking about only a few pay periods before that Social Security number is available. So again, you can either inform them, and this is something that we can help do with, concerns, of course, about informing them that you need to withhold a certain amount of your, pay, your wages to pay taxes yourself. That is where they wouldn't have the W-2, which means you aren't, as an employer, withholding it for them, making those deductions. Or again, you can just make those deductions. Thank you, Ursula. You can have, as an employer, make those deductions in your payroll, put them in escrow, and then once they get their Social Security numbers, pay them.
Alex, I just want to add some information. So now the process of the Social Security and other immigration document is a bit different. So while the new refugees are coming to the United States to the State Department and other relevant agencies, they apply before they come to the United States for all the documents for them. So when they are coming or entering to the United States, so they have most of the documents they have. So only SSN that takes almost from 1 to 3 weeks maximum. So within this time of period, they will be receiving and having their own SSN number. This is the new process. So now we are just finished with all the previous work. They were coming to the United States and they were living in the camps and bases. Now the State Department finishes the process outside the United States when they have all the documentation available and prepared in there coming to the United States, and they have most of them, they have all the relevant documents.
Great. Yeah. So again, go ahead.
It sounds like it's rare that you might have this instance.
Yep. It is more likely as an asylum seeker to see this actually, because those are their work and Social Security processes, work permit authorization and Social Security processes are very far apart in terms of how that's done and managed. But again, when we're talking about folks coming through ECDC and through the refugee process, you're right. It'll be rare that they don't have a Social Security number, and yeah, so there may be 1 or 2 employees, if again in your cohort, because we're all onboarding everyone together. So it's easy to get through all the paperwork as a team. It may just be 1 or 2 employees at most, but ideally, it's not something folks need to worry about.
I just want to kind of like close it out with just a couple of words about, again, who the partners are involved in this. So there are, as Alex has mentioned before, there's ECDC, which is the Refugee Resettlement Agency that established a field office in Brattleboro and will be establishing one in Bennington. There's CAST, Community Asylum Seekers Project. There are likely to be other players over time involved in this. It's possible for people to be resettled in areas through different systems that use circles of care, various things like that. And so what's really important is we are working at BDCC to sort of bring things back to the center to try to have sort of a transparent and knowable process, and also bring a lot of expertise. There's sort of Alex's workforce expertise, who's been working with employers and workforce for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. But also that Amir and Abdul also really bring specific expertise. Amir worked in refugee resettlement in Afghanistan. So actually, when we started doing this work last winter, it was really lucky that one of the people who arrived early on was someone who actually had done this kind of work, helping people from other countries move in and kind of resettle and find employment. And then Abdul has a legal background. And so, when it comes to things around policies and procedures, really brings that kind of background and knowledge and meticulousness. So I want to sort of just highlight, the carefulness with which we are doing this, and that we're really kind of collaborating. When you submit an intake form, it goes into a drive that we all share across our agencies, and we're not trying to create new barriers or pick winners and losers. We're trying to make sure there's really a knowable, transparent process that when we've seen things go awry in the past is when someone got a great job with the help of a friend or a neighbor or a volunteer, but no one figured out how they were going to get to and from work. And that became a problem. Or no one figured out sort of how translation was going to happen or interpretation through the onboarding process to really make sure they were trained. And so we really come at this with a kind of a careful approach, a deliberate approach that has been really successful, in addition to the data that Alex cited about the people who are employed. And there are 9 other people at least who've gotten jobs. We've had a great time onboarding folks with CNS wholesalers the past month, thanks to heroic efforts by Abdul and Amir, including a lot of cultural training with their supervisors and managers. But we really also have seen really great retention and people being advanced. I have a list of 7 or 8 people who've received promotions and are becoming supervisors themselves. So I can't emphasize enough what a great job we're doing, how well this is going. But it requires really kind of like learning from each other and that level of intention. Thank you.
Great. Well, that is our webinar and presentation. Again, we're reachable, findable. I will make sure that the PowerPoint is made available to anyone interested. But again, welcomingcommunitiesvt.com. You'll see places to donate to ECDC or CASP. If you're an employer looking to hire, you can do it there. If you just have questions, my information is on there, and recordings of old videos like this as well. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you all soon.